Have you ever wondered what makes someone suddenly realize the value of what they once ignored? It is one of the deepest human experiences. The moment when silence becomes louder than words, when absence weighs heavier than presence ever did. This is the moment psychology reveals, when a woman begins to miss the man she once took for granted. Not because he changed into someone else, but because she finally saw the space he filled, now left empty. It is a space no one else can duplicate, because it carries the memory of his patience, his presence, and his quiet strength. Human beings rarely appreciate what feels constant. The mind tricks us into believing what is always there will never leave. Psychologists call it the normalcy bias, the assumption that today will look like yesterday, and tomorrow will look the same. But when that constancy breaks, when the familiar disappears, the brain scrambles to make sense of it. This is when missing begins. It is not just longing for a person, it is the shock of realizing how much they shaped your everyday world. The man who was once overlooked becomes unforgettable because his absence disrupts the very rhythm of life. When you are always available, always giving, always present, the mind adapts. What was once extraordinary begins to feel ordinary. Acts of kindness blur into background noise. But when that giving stops, when attention is withdrawn, the silence forces awareness. The mind replays the small moments, the way he listened without judgment, the way he supported without needing recognition, the way his presence brought stability when emotions wavered. These memories are no longer dismissed. They become treasures that the heart reclaims too late. This is why distance often does what closeness could not. Distance exposes the depth of value. Absence is a mirror. It reflects everything a person ignored, everything they dismissed as normal, and magnifies it. Psychology shows us that human attachment strengthens when deprivation sets in. When the brain is denied something it once had freely, the desire intensifies. The woman who thought she could always lean on him suddenly feels the ground less steady beneath her feet. That unease, that emptiness, is the birthplace of missing. But here is the deeper truth. This is not just about her. It is about you. It is about understanding your own worth so deeply that you do not need to chase validation. You do not need to beg to be seen. When you recognize that your presence is a gift, you stop overgiving to those who undervalue it. You stop repeating the cycle of proving your worth. And paradoxically, that is when your absence begins to echo in their mind. That is when the woman who overlooked you starts to feel your weight more in your silence than she ever did in your words. Stay with this message, because it will show you how to turn pain into power. It will reveal why missing is not about weakness but about strength. You will see how psychology works in your favor, how the same mind that once ignored you can become the mind that cannot stop thinking about you. This is not about games, and it is not about manipulation. It is about reclaiming the power of self-respect. By the end, you will understand why walking away with dignity leaves the strongest mark, and you will never see yourself the same way again. Why is it that people only recognize value when it is no longer in their hands? Psychology explains this through a principle called contrast. The mind notices things not in abundance, but in scarcity. When something is always present, the brain normalizes it. When it is gone, the sudden change triggers a surge of awareness. That awareness is painful because it forces a person to confront the truth. They had something rare, and they let it slip away. For a woman who once dismissed the man who stood by her side, this realization cuts deeply. It is not just about missing him, it is about facing the guilt of having overlooked what was real, loyal, and irreplaceable. The heart is wired to crave stability. Even those who pretend they don't need it are unconsciously searching for it. When a man consistently shows up with care, reliability, and quiet strength, he provides that stability. But when it is withdrawn, when he chooses to step back, the nervous system registers the loss like a shock. Anxiety rises, thoughts race, and the mind keeps circling back to the same question: why isn't he here anymore? That question is the beginning of longing. It is the start of missing what was once ignored. This longing is not just emotional, it is biological. The brain releases dopamine during connection, rewarding closeness and attention. When that source of reward is cut off, the brain begins to crave it the same way it craves an addiction. This is why she begins to replay memories, why the smallest reminders suddenly sting, why the silence feels louder than any argument ever did. Missing is not random. It is the brain's desperate attempt to fill the gap left behind by someone who mattered more than she realized. And this is where your power lies. Because once you understand that your presence creates emotional impact, you no longer feel the need to prove it with constant effort. You realize that giving endlessly without boundaries does not make you more valued. It makes you more invisible. The more you overextend, the more someone's mind normalizes your presence. But when you step back, when you guard your energy, when you choose to protect your peace, you shift the balance of power. Suddenly, your absence commands more attention than your presence ever did. What you must understand is that missing is not created through chasing, pleading, or explaining your worth. It is created through space. It is created through the boldness to let silence speak. The mind cannot ignore the void you leave behind when you walk away with self-respect. And that void becomes the teacher. It teaches her what words could not. It shows her the weight of everything she dismissed. This is why strength is not in clinging but in releasing. It is in choosing dignity over desperation. It is in trusting that your worth will echo louder in your absence than in your attempts to be noticed. The moment you stop proving, you start being felt. The moment you let go, you become unforgettable. That is the paradox psychology reveals. The less you chase, the more you are chased. The less you try to be remembered, the more you are missed. And when you embrace this truth, you step into a new kind of freedom. You stop begging for recognition. You stop fearing loss. Instead, you embody presence so strong that when it is gone, it leaves a silence impossible to ignore. This is the silence that creates missing. This is the silence that turns regret into memory, and memory into longing. And it all begins when you finally decide to respect your own value more than anyone else ever could. Have you noticed how silence carries a weight that words cannot? It is in that silence where realization grows strongest. When someone no longer hears your voice, no longer feels your presence, no longer receives your energy, the emptiness you leave begins to expand in their mind. Psychology calls this the scarcity effect. The more unavailable something becomes, the more valuable it feels. What once seemed ordinary now becomes extraordinary, not because it changed, but because the opportunity to experience it is gone. And that is when missing turns from a faint thought into a burning ache. When a woman once dismissed the man who gave without limits, she thought his presence was endless. She assumed patience had no boundary, that care had no price, that attention would never fade. But the human mind is wired to resist loss. When the constant disappears, the brain begins to magnify every detail. What she once overlooked now appears golden in hindsight. The small gestures she ignored, the way he checked in, the way he stood steady in storms, the way he gave without demanding, become symbols of what she cannot find again. That is the cruel precision of memory. It edits out the moment she took for granted and highlights the absence that now defines her reality. And here lies the truth. Missing does not arise from words spoken. It arises from actions no longer present. It is not about the dramatic gestures but the everyday consistencies. It is not about what was said in passion but what was lived in patience. When those steady acts vanish, the contrast is unbearable. Psychology teaches us that the brain clings hardest to what it fears losing, and once lost, the craving is relentless. She begins to realize it was not attention from just anyone she wanted. It was the specific attention of the man who once stood by her, unshaken, unbroken, and underestimated. But here is where your strength emerges. You must see that being missed is not the goal. Living with self-respect is. The true transformation comes when you no longer measure your value by someone else's recognition, but by your own. Because when you value yourself enough to step back, to hold boundaries, to protect your energy, you send a message stronger than any argument could. That message is this: my presence is a privilege, not a guarantee. My love is a gift, not an obligation. My time is an offering, not a demand. This shift does something profound. It changes the way you carry yourself. You no longer try to convince, persuade, or beg to be seen. Instead, you embody a quiet confidence that cannot be ignored, and confidence leaves echoes. It lingers in memory long after you are gone. It makes others realize that what they dismissed was not replaceable, because it was never ordinary. Understand this deeply. The mind always replays the absence of what was unique. If you were easy to replace, you would not be missed. If what you gave was shallow, it would be forgotten. But because your presence carried depth, because your energy carried authenticity, because your love carried truth, the absence you leave is powerful enough to haunt. That is why missing is not weakness, it is proof of impact. And your task is not to wait for that recognition, but to live in the strength of knowing you created it. When you no longer need to be missed, that is when you are missed the most. There comes a point when the mind begins to wrestle with the weight of regret. Regret is one of the most powerful psychological triggers because it locks the brain into an endless cycle of replaying what could have been. When someone realizes they had something valuable but dismissed it, their thoughts no longer move forward easily. They loop backward, revisiting conversations, moments and choices, trying to find the point where they went wrong. For the woman who overlooked the man who once gave without measure, this cycle becomes an invisible prison. She starts to recognize that his presence was not just comfort, it was security. His absence is not just silence, it is exposure to the reality that no one else has filled the space he left behind. This recognition grows heavier over time. Psychology reveals that loss aversion, the fear of losing something, is twice as powerful as the joy of gaining something new. That is why she can meet others, seek distractions, and chase temporary comfort, but none of it satisfies. The shadow of what she dismissed remains stronger than the newness she tries to embrace. The brain is not fooled by substitutes. It knows when something is authentic, and when that authenticity is gone, nothing feels quite enough. This is why missing deepens rather than fades. Time does not erase impact, it magnifies it. For you, this truth is a call to rise higher. It reminds you that your worth does not decrease because someone failed to recognize it in the moment. Their blindness does not reduce your light. Their inability to appreciate you is not proof of your inadequacy. It is proof of their limitation. The moment you embrace this, you free yourself from the chains of needing their acknowledgement. You stop asking, why didn't they see my value? And start affirming, I was valuable regardless of who saw it. This mindset is liberation. It transforms the pain of being overlooked into the strength of self-certainty. And paradoxically, this transformation is what intensifies their missing. Because when you no longer dwell in their absence, when you rise with clarity and confidence, they are left to dwell in yours. Missing always hits harder when it is one-sided. When she looks back and sees you moving forward, her regret grows sharper. When she remembers your patience but sees you no longer waiting, her longing deepens. When she recalls your devotion but realizes it is no longer available to her, the weight of her decisions becomes unbearable. That is the psychology of contrast working against her and in your favor. Your responsibility is not to hope for her regret. Your responsibility is to live in your power. The true reward is not being missed. It is knowing you no longer need to be. That independence is where your strength lives. Because once you detach from the need to be validated, you become unshakable. You stop living as someone waiting to be seen and start living as someone who already knows their vision, their purpose, their worth. And that energy is magnetic. It makes people look back and realize the depth of what they lost. Never forget this. Being taken for granted does not mean you lacked value. It means your value was so constant it became invisible to someone who did not know how to cherish it. But the moment you choose self-respect over self-sacrifice, you rewrite the story. You turn regret into their burden, not yours. And in that shift, you gain something far more powerful than being missed. You gain the unbreakable strength of knowing your worth can never again be ignored. The moment you stop seeking external recognition is the moment you begin to radiate a strength that cannot be ignored. Human psychology is drawn to what feels certain, grounded, and unshakable. When you no longer bend yourself to be noticed, you create a magnetic presence that commands attention without words. This is why absence becomes so powerful, because it is no longer filled with waiting or weakness, but with quiet authority. The more you invest in yourself, the more you grow, the more you embody self-respect, the more your silence becomes unforgettable. A woman who once overlooked you is confronted not only with the emptiness you left, but also with the reality that you are no longer available to her in the same way. This is where the deepest missing is born. Psychology shows us that humans crave what feels scarce, and nothing feels scarcer than someone who once gave endlessly but now gives selectively. Scarcity amplifies value. It rewires the brain to see what was once dismissed as essential, and in that moment she realizes it was never just about what you did, it was about who you were. This shift forces her to reflect on the balance of energy she once ignored. She begins to see the patience she called ordinary as extraordinary. She remembers the loyalty she dismissed as expected as something rare. She recalls the consistency she overlooked as the very anchor she now lacks. This reframing is not accidental. It is psychological inevitability. The human mind assigns greater worth when loss exposes the reality of what is gone. The man she took for granted becomes the man she cannot forget, not because he is still reaching for her, but because he stopped. And for you, this is not about revenge. It is not about enjoying her regret. It is about realizing that your worth was never dependent on her recognition in the first place. Your value exists whether it is seen or unseen, acknowledged or ignored. The gift of being overlooked is that it forces you to stop placing your identity in someone else's hands. It pushes you to look inward, to define yourself not by how others treat you, but by how you choose to treat yourself. And when you rise with that clarity, you become untouchable. That is why missing is so powerful. It becomes proof that you mattered, but more importantly, it becomes proof that you moved beyond needing to matter to those who did not value you. Because true freedom is not being remembered, it is being whole within yourself. And yet, that very wholeness is what lingers in her memory. It is what she cannot replace. It is what keeps her restless at night, revisiting the moments when you were there and realizing she no longer has access to them. Hold on to this truth. The more you grow in your own strength, the louder your absence speaks. The more you respect your own boundaries, the deeper the missing becomes for those who once crossed them. And the more you embody your worth, the less you need to be recognized to feel powerful. That is the paradox. You are missed most when you no longer need to be. You become unforgettable the moment you stop trying to be remembered. That is the essence of transformation. That is the psychology of true strength. There is a law in human psychology that cannot be denied. People do not cherish what they feel entitled to. When something feels guaranteed, the mind begins to treat it as background noise, something assumed rather than acknowledged. But the instant that guarantee is broken, everything changes. What was once ignored becomes the center of focus. What was once undervalued becomes priceless. This is the moment when absence reshapes perception, when the reality of loss awakens awareness, and when missing grows stronger than pride. For the woman who dismissed the man who stood by her, this shift is unavoidable. She cannot escape the contrast between the comfort she once had and the emptiness she now feels. She begins to remember the way his patience calms storms, the way his presence steadied her chaos, the way his devotion was never conditional. At the time, it felt ordinary, but in his absence, it feels irreplaceable. This is how the brain works. It edits out what is constant and highlights what is lost. And the more she tries to distract herself, the louder the reminders become. The psychology of memory does not allow true impact to vanish. It makes it echo louder in silence than it ever did in noise. But this truth is not only about her recognition, it is about your awakening, because once you see that being taken for granted was never about your lack of worth, you begin to reclaim the power you once gave away. You stop blaming yourself for someone else's blindness. You stop confusing their inability to value you with a reflection of who you are. Instead, you recognize the deeper truth. Their neglect was not your deficiency, it was their limitation. And the moment you internalize this, your energy shifts. You no longer wait to be validated. You begin to validate yourself. You no longer fight to be remembered. You choose to live unforgettable by the way you carry your dignity. This shift radiates in every part of your life. The more you stand in self-respect, the more people feel the weight of your absence when they lose access to you. They realize you were not replaceable because what you offered came from depth, authenticity, and consistency. These qualities cannot be duplicated because they are not techniques, they are truth. And truth leaves an imprint that lingers long after presence is gone. That is why missing becomes inevitable. It is not because you forced it. It is because your essence carried weight, and weight is always felt when it is removed. What you must hold on to is this. You do not need to chase in order to be remembered. You do not need to lower yourself in order to be valued. The very act of standing tall, of walking away with your head high, creates an echo louder than any plea for recognition. That echo is what fills the silence for her. That echo is what keeps her restless in moments she thought she would feel free. That echo is the proof that you mattered far beyond her acknowledgement. So do not fear being taken for granted. Do not fear being overlooked, because the same people who once dismissed you will eventually confront the truth that they cannot erase you. Missing is not weakness. It is the shadow of your strength. It is the mind's confession that your presence was never ordinary. And the more you embody your worth, the more undeniable that truth becomes. The human heart is wired to feel the strongest pull toward what it can no longer touch. This is why the absence of someone who once gave fully becomes a weight that lingers in the deepest corners of the mind. When you were present, your consistency became invisible to her perception. But now, in your absence, every detail of who you were begins to rise from memory with amplified intensity. Psychology reveals that deprivation increases desire. The moment something is out of reach, the brain assigns it more importance than it ever did when it was freely available. This is not coincidence. It is the natural response to loss. She may have thought she could overlook you, but the truth is she cannot erase the impact of your presence, the laughter that once filled quiet spaces, the reassurance that once steadied her fears, the reliability that once anchored her life. All of it becomes magnified the moment it is gone. The human mind resists uncertainty, and your absence creates it. It forces her to face the reality that no one else has stepped in to replicate what you once offered. And that realization deepens the missing. It grows from a fleeting thought into a persistent ache, because the brain does not release what it associates with safety and connection. For you, the power lies in understanding that you no longer have to prove what is already proven. Your worth is not a negotiation. It is not something to be argued for or pleaded over. It simply is. The mistake is believing that constant availability will secure appreciation. It never does. What secures appreciation is boundaries. What secures recognition is the boldness to step back when you are undervalued. And what secures lasting impact is the courage to honor yourself first. The very act of pulling away does what endless giving could not. It forces awareness. That awareness is not just her burden, it is your liberation. Because when you stop centering your life around being recognized by another, you begin to see the depth of your own strength. You begin to build a life that does not revolve around being remembered, but around being fulfilled. And when you do, something remarkable happens. The same energy that once tried to hold you back is now pulled toward you. Because nothing is more magnetic than someone who no longer needs external approval. That confidence becomes unforgettable. It becomes the reason your absence is felt so sharply. This is the paradox of being taken for granted. While in the moment it feels like rejection, in truth it is the stage for revelation. It sets the scene where your worth shines brightest, not in their presence but in your absence. And as she wrestles with regret, you rise with clarity. As she replays memories, you step into new possibilities. As she longs for what she cannot regain, you embrace the freedom of what you no longer need. Remember this, missing is not the measure of your value. Self-respect is. But the very self-respect that frees you is also what creates the missing in her heart. Because nothing haunts the human mind more than realizing that what was once taken for granted is now gone forever. That is not your weakness, it is your undeniable strength. The reason pain lingers so deeply is because it is tied to identity. When someone betrays you, it doesn't just wound your heart, it shakes the very foundation of who you thought you were in their eyes. You begin to question your worth, your choices, your ability to see the truth, but the moment you recognize that their actions are not a reflection of your value, you begin to take back the power that was never meant to leave your hands. No matter how much someone tries to diminish you, they cannot define you unless you allow their betrayal to become the story you tell yourself about who you are. You are not the sum of the promises they broke. You are not the echo of the lies they told. You are not the casualty of their weakness. You are the one who survived it, who stood in the ruins and still had the courage to breathe, to feel, to hope. That resilience alone speaks louder than anything they could ever do to you. The fact that you are still here, still listening, still searching for meaning, is proof that life has not abandoned you. It is waiting for you to claim what is already yours. The human heart is not fragile, it is unbreakable. It bends, it cracks, it bleeds, but it does not end. Every scar it carries becomes a new layer of strength, a reminder of everything you have endured and risen above. And while betrayal may silence you for a moment, it can never erase your voice. Your voice carries the power to redefine this chapter, to stand taller, to say with certainty, I am not finished. Forgiveness in this journey is not about excusing the harm. It is about refusing to chain yourself to the pain. Holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting it to heal you. Releasing it does not mean you condone what was done. It means you refuse to let it live inside you rent-free. It means you choose freedom over resentment, peace over turmoil, growth over stagnation. It means you decide that your heart deserves space to expand again. And while you may feel broken, you are not. Breakage implies finality, but you are still alive, still unfolding, still capable of transformation. The cracks you feel within you are not weaknesses. They are openings for light to enter. They are invitations to rebuild stronger, to rise wiser, to embody a depth of love and compassion that only those who have known pain can truly carry. Every time you look at yourself in the mirror and choose to keep moving, you reclaim another piece of yourself. Every time you decide not to chase after the one who hurt you, you prove to your own soul that you are worth more than their absence. Every time you refuse to settle for less than honesty, respect, and loyalty, you write a new standard for your life. This is how you transform, not by pretending the betrayal didn't wound you, but by allowing the wound to awaken something greater within you. Not by denying the tears, but by letting them cleanse you of the illusions that kept you small. Not by erasing the past, but by using it as the fire that propels you into the future you were always meant to step into. You are not defined by who left, who lied, or who broke their promises. You are defined by who you choose to become in the aftermath. And right now, you are standing at the threshold of becoming unstoppable. Strength is not built in the absence of pain, but in the choice to rise while still carrying it. The weight on your shoulders, the ache in your chest, the heaviness in your spirit, all of it is proof that you are alive, proof that you have the capacity to feel, and proof that you have not given up. Do not confuse your exhaustion with weakness. Even the strongest souls grow tired. But what separates them is their decision to keep walking forward when standing still feels safer. Every step you take through the fog of disappointment is a declaration that you refuse to let darkness dictate the course of your life. There is a part of you that already knows you deserve more. That voice inside that whispers, even in your lowest moments, that your story is not over. It is the part of you that cannot be silenced. That whisper is not wishful thinking, it is truth. It is the eternal reminder that your worth is untouched by betrayal, that your beauty is not diminished by rejection, and that your destiny is not cancelled by someone else's failure to see your value. Healing begins when you no longer measure your worth by the love you did or did not receive from someone else. It begins when you stop waiting for them to return, to apologize, to finally see you. It begins the moment you decide that closure is not something they give you, it is something you give yourself. You do not need their permission to move on. You do not need their validation to rebuild. You do not need their presence to feel whole again. What you need is the courage to stand in your own reflection and say, I am enough, exactly as I am. The power of transformation lies in that declaration. Because once you accept your enoughness, the chains of comparison break. You stop competing with ghosts. You stop replaying scenarios. You stop asking questions that have no answers. Instead, you begin to channel your energy into the one thing you can control, who you are becoming. And in that space, life begins to open doors you once thought were locked forever. New opportunities, new connections, new strength begin to emerge because you are no longer anchored to the weight of someone who chose to let go of you. The truth is, anyone who could not honor you was never truly aligned with the greatness inside you. Their leaving is not rejection. It is redirection. It is the clearing of a path for something greater to take root in your life. It is the universe removing what was unworthy so that you can finally rise into what is worthy. But that rise cannot happen until you stop clinging to what has already proven itself incapable of giving you what you deserve. Every tear you have shed has been watering the soil of your rebirth. Every night you thought would break, you has only carved deeper strength within your soul. And every time you chose to stand again, even when no one was watching, you were building a foundation that no betrayal can ever shake. You are not broken, you are being rebuilt into someone who no longer begs for love, but commands it by the power of your presence, the clarity of your standards, and the unshakable truth of your worth. This is the moment where your pain transforms into purpose. This is where wounds become wisdom. This is where heartbreak becomes the catalyst for a life so much bigger than what you once thought possible. The fire that was meant to destroy you will become the very flame that lights your way forward. Every time you rise after being knocked down, you rewrite the meaning of strength. Strength is not the absence of struggle. It is the refusal to let struggle define you. It is the fire that builds when you realize that every ending is a disguised beginning, and that every wound holds the potential to birth a greater version of you. The same pain that once felt unbearable is the very energy that can fuel your transformation if you refuse to let it make you bitter. You are not defined by what happened to you. You are defined by what you choose to become because of it. There is a version of you waiting to emerge that is more powerful, more grounded, and more untouchable than the one who was broken. That version is already inside you, pressing against the walls of your fear, demanding to be born. And the moment you stop resisting growth and embrace it, the moment you stop clinging to the past and lean into the unknown, is the moment your true power begins to unfold. The heartbreak was not proof of your inadequacy, it was proof of your capacity to love. But love is not meant to be something that drains you, it is meant to expand you. And when someone cannot meet you at the depth of what you give, it is not a reflection of your worth, it is simply the limit of their capacity. That is not your burden to carry. Release the need to prove yourself to those who could not see you. Release the chains of waiting for recognition that will never come. The freedom you are looking for does not come from their acceptance. It comes from your own decision to accept yourself completely. When you shift your focus inward, something extraordinary happens. You begin to realize that the very love you kept searching for in others has always been within you, waiting for your acknowledgement. You begin to notice that the validation you craved can never truly fill the void if it does not first come from your own soul. And you begin to feel that peace is not the absence of pain, but the presence of alignment with who you truly are. You are no longer the same person who once tolerated less than you deserved. The fire of disappointment has burned away illusions, leaving you with the raw clarity of what you will and will not accept moving forward. That is not a loss, that is liberation. With that clarity comes a new strength, the kind that no longer begs for attention, no longer fears abandonment, and no longer questions its own worth. Your story from here is not one of survival, but of rebirth. You are not meant to stay in the ashes, you are meant to rise above them, brighter and bolder than ever before. The chapter that begins now is not defined by what you lost, but by what you are creating. A life built not on fear of being left, but on the unshakable, knowing that you are whole whether anyone stays or goes. This is your turning point, the moment where resilience becomes your identity, where self-love becomes your foundation, and where your future is written not by what broke you, but by what you chose to build from it. When you finally understand that your value is not up for negotiation, you stop shrinking to fit into places that were never meant to hold you. You stop waiting for someone else to recognize what you already know in your heart. You stop bending under the weight of expectations that were never yours to carry. This is where true freedom begins. When you realize that the love you give to yourself sets the standard for the love you allow from others. There is power in reclaiming your own attention. For too long it may have been scattered, given away to people who did not protect it, invested in situations that drained you, lost in thoughts of what could have been. But the moment you decide to pull it back, to gather it in your hands and direct it toward your growth, everything changes. You feel energy returning to you. You feel clarity replacing confusion. You feel strength building in places where weakness once lived. And with this strength comes a quiet but unshakable confidence, not the kind that needs to prove itself, not the kind that depends on applause, but the kind that simply exists because it is rooted in truth. You begin to walk differently, not because you want to be seen, but because you no longer fear being unseen. You carry yourself with dignity, not to impress, but because you finally understand that dignity is your birthright. The beauty of this transformation is that it does not just change how you see yourself, it changes how the world sees you. Energy is real. People feel it. When you radiate self-respect, when you embody peace, when you move with intention, others notice. Those who once overlooked you begin to feel the weight of your absence. Those who once doubted you begin to question their own blindness. This is not revenge, it is the natural consequence of stepping fully into your own power. And yet the true reward is not their recognition. It is the inner knowing that you no longer need it. It is the peace of no longer being tied to the rise and fall of someone else's attention. It is the joy of building a life where your happiness is not borrowed from anyone, but created by your own hands. That is the kind of power no one can take away. The most liberating realization you will ever have is that you are not waiting for anyone to validate your worth anymore. You are not hoping for a call, a text, or an apology to feel whole. You are not living on pause for someone else to finally see what they missed. You are moving forward, and in moving forward you become untouchable. This is where longing turns into clarity. This is where heartbreak turns into wisdom. This is where rejection turns into redirection. And the more you lean into this truth, the more unstoppable you become. Because once you taste the freedom of knowing your worth, you will never again settle for the chains of being taken for granted. Your future is not behind you. It is unfolding with every decision you make now, every boundary you set, every ounce of self-love you give. Every step you take away from what no longer serves you is proof that you are building something greater. You are not waiting to be chosen. You are already chosen by yourself. And that is the choice that changes everything. The moment you stop chasing what is no longer meant for you, a new kind of silence enters your life. It is not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of peace. It is the space where your heart begins to breathe again, where your mind is no longer trapped in endless loops of what if and why not. This silence is where healing begins. It is where you finally hear your own voice clearly, unclouded by the noise of disappointment. And in that clarity you realize that you were never lacking. You were simply giving your fullness to those who could not hold it. When you let go of needing to be remembered by someone who once overlooked you, you step into the higher power of being unforgettable by the person who matters most, yourself. This shift is not about arrogance, it is about alignment. It is about no longer waiting for someone else to assign meaning to your existence. The meaning is already there. It is written in the way you rise after pain, in the way you keep moving forward even with scars, in the way you refuse to let your story end in heartbreak. That is the strength that no one can deny, not even those who once took it for granted. Human psychology reveals something powerful. Absence creates space for recognition.